plants, and I became very conscious of how to put a meal together. So how to get a whole grain with a pulse, and where to get my protein from a plant-based diet. And that stuck with me through my practice into my own eating today. And then I transitioned slowly into eating more animal products, primarily through studying to become a nutritional therapist, through my own reading, and then just through self-experimentation. And I found that my body type actually dealt better with having a small amount of animal protein. And that's still the way I eat now, is that I would say I eat about 85% completely vegan and plant-based. And then the other part is very good quality animal products. And for me, that looks like eggs and fish and a small amount of chicken and lamb. And it's very, very carefully considered within the grand sphere of things. But I would say my main protein is still to this day coming from plant-based sources. Okay. So the reason that I started experimenting with adding animal products in was this issue with omega-3.
Ah, okay.
And so
I didn't know that poignant question that I'm asking then.
Yeah, I'm delighted that we're talking about this. And I think it's really interesting what you were saying there about the echo chamber of social media, especially when you're on a plant-based diet, of thinking everything is fine and that you can get everything from a plant-based diet, because I was certainly very much in that sphere. And I know a lot of my colleagues who were vegan were in that sphere as well, of just hearing constantly that it would be fine, that we would get everything from our diet. And it wasn't until I started functional testing in a big way, not only on myself, but on my clients, actually, that I started adding more animal products in, specifically to cover off this omega-3 issue.
I'm just going to hold you there one second, Cara. So just... I'm just putting half a teaspoon of salt into the water that we're going to boil the potatoes in. And you can see I've just cut the potatoes. They're all kind of even sizes, fairly small because we want them to cook quite quickly. And I'm just going to pop them in there and bring it back to the boil, and then boil for kind of 15, 20 minutes until they're cooked, just so you don't miss a thing. And then whilst Cara's talking, I'm just going to chop the capers and then add that to, chop the red chili pepper, the dill and the chives, and just add that to a wee bowl. Carry on, Cara.
Oh, no. So, so I think the main question I do get asked about a vegan diet is can you get enough omega-3 from it? I mean, that's the million-dollar question, because we're taking out fish, which is our main source of EPA and DHEA. And the answer, unfortunately, and I wish it wasn't true, is no.
So can you explain just the EPA and DHA thing? Because that's you get that from the omega-3. Your body converts that from omega-3, doesn't it?
Yes, so that's a very good question. So let's take it back to what is an essential fatty acid. What is omega-3 in the first place? Because it's a bit of a buzzword, isn't it? But omega-3 is an essential fatty acid. There are two main types of essential fatty acids. There's ALA, alpha lipoic acid, and lipoic acid, so LA. And they are your two main essential fatty acids. Now, essential fatty acids can also be referred to as polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs. So we have so many terms for fats in nutritional therapy and in nutrition that it's so easy to get confused. So
it's also nuts because the layman sort of thinks fat equals bad, but there's just so much more to it.
Totally, and it's a really good point. You know, we've really moved on from that 90s nutrition of avoid all fat because it's going to give you cardiovascular disease. We now know how important fat is for the cardiovascular system. So polyunsaturated fatty acids then break into two categories, omega-6 and omega-3. And essentially, they are coming from alpha-lipoic acid. So omega-6 and omega-3 refers solely to where the double bond is in the hydrocarbon chain of the fat. So in an omega-3, the first chain is 3 joins after the omega end of the hydrocarbon chain. And in an omega-6, it's 3. it's 6 points in. So it's just the length of that first part of the fat in the hydrocarbon chain, if you're looking at it solely from an anatomical point of view.
Full-on science lesson,
basically, yeah, yeah. Basically, omega-3 from an animal source, so oily fats and fish, contain EPA and DHA, and they are the active form of that polyunsaturated fatty acids. They are the anti-inflammatory component of the fat. So they're the part that's going to go on and have a causative anti-inflammatory effect within the body.
Wow, I never ever would have thought of fats as anti-inflammatory.
Yeah, so they are the biggest anti-inflammatory we have within the body. Right. Omega-3 and specifically EPA, so the active component of omega-3, the active fat part of omega-3 EPA, is responsible for cell membrane signaling, for gene expression, for fluidity of the membranes, for the ability to get nutrients from plasma into the cell, into the ribosome of the cell, to be able to then form in the mitochondria into cellular energy. So unless you've got proper membrane capacity within the cells through proper amounts of EPA, then what happens is the cell membranes become very rigid and it's harder to get nutrients into the cells. So then that's how they then impact on gene expression, because if we don't have proper cellular function, then we don't have proper gene expression. They're responsible for proper function of the cardiovascular system, the fluid membranes in the lungs, and for remaining that immune system in perfect balance with its anti-inflammatory component. And what we find is, in a modern diet, we really want the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 to be 3:1. That's what it was in hunter-gatherer times, is you had a ratio 3 omega-3 to 1 omega-6. Omega-6 is inflammatory. But now in the modern day, we've got a ratio of 40:1. So we have 40 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. And so our entire system is skewed towards inflammation. And when we're skewed towards inflammation, we're skewed towards cardiovascular disease, diabetes, dementia, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, you name it. Chronic disease starts and stops with that ratio. So it's super important to get omega-3 into a vegan diet. And it is possible, but it requires supplementation.
Okay, so hence I'm making these delicious fish cakes tonight, which are delicious regardless of your answer here. But
Absolutely.
So I use seaweed, and I think I'm getting omega-3 into my diet by having seaweed, because obviously it tastes like fish, it's got a lot of great properties, and I'm sort of thinking seaweed, yep, I'm checking it off. Am I?
In theory you are, yes. So there is omega-3, and this is where the body gets so cool, and this is where the echo chamber of Instagram is damaging.
Well, that's the thing. So by looking on Instagram, I believe that I am getting what I need from seaweed, but I've got a feeling you're about to crash my hopes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So omega-3 is in seaweed, but the conversion of that omega from the seaweed is about 2%. So in order to get enough omega-3, so you want to get about 500 mg of omega-3 per day. And in order to do that, you would have to eat 50 grams of seaweed.
Okay, so just to visualize that, 50 grams of seaweed, this pack of seaweed here, which has got 3 sachets like that in it, is 30 grams.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of seaweed. And in these fish cakes that we're making today, which is going to feed 3 to 4 people, we're using one of these sachets. So we're using 10 grams of seaweed in what we're cooking tonight. And you're saying it should be 50 grams that we need to get our RDA.
50 grams per day to get your intake.
I'm not hitting it then, am I?
not hitting it. I mean, there are other vegan sources of omega-3. There's walnuts, there's flax,
Okay.
there's chia seed, there's hemp. The issue with those is that, again, we've got conversion at a rate of 2%. So we're not getting the level of EPA that you would be getting from an animal source. And that's not to say that we need the animal source. We can supplement it with algae supplementation. So with a form of seaweed, essentially, that has just been extracted, and therefore you have higher levels. So
and can you cook with algae oil?
No.
Oh.
No, it would oxidize very quickly.
Okay.
And become a free radical very, very quickly. No, it has to. I wish it was the case, but it has to come from supplementation. And there's some very good brands out there. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention brands.
Pop them in the comments.
Yeah.
Cara,
I will.
it's quite helpful to know. For me, especially, I'm kind of interested for my own health. I think if I should probably start using some. Yeah,
so there's some very good vegan DHA and vegan EPA. And what you want to look for is algae, vegan, EPA, or DHEA. So if it says vegan omega on it, that's not what we want. We want the active ingredient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating because I think that's the thing from like I say, I spend quite a long time trawling for information to try to prove that plant-based eating is the best way of eating. But I'm very conscious that a lot of the stuff that I do read will say things that, when I dig more into it, like for example about getting enough iron in your diet and getting enough calcium in your diet and these sorts of things, what I tend to find is that often, sure, you're getting enough of it, but it's about that conversion or absorption that actually is where you start to struggle, because it might be the case that you're getting enough of it, which is kind of what I was thinking with seaweed, but actually it's something that happens in your body that means you're not actually getting the right bits of it or something. So it's such a minefield. It's really, really difficult to navigate.
Oh, it's such a minefield. And so this comes down to people's delta-6 desaturase expression as well. So delta-6 desaturase is what takes the alpha lipoic acid and converts it down into EPA. So we're looking at enzyme expression, we're looking at his ability to absorb. We're looking at the presence of alcohol, the presence of stress, the presence of pollution. All of those things will compete with absorption of omega-3 and also compete with that enzyme delta-6 desaturase. So it really is, as you say, you can absolutely get enough iron and enough calcium from a vegan diet. Like, that's undisputed. But can you get it when you're stressed, drinking, and have a lot of sugar in your diet, and maybe have a snip on one of those genetic enzymes that we need in order to properly metabolize it? Maybe. So it really is just about kind of looking at it very laterally. And I would recommend, I eat animal products to fill that gap, but I also supplement. And I recommend that everybody supplements omega-3, regardless of whether they're on a plant-based or animal protein diet. Like, every one of my clients gets omega-3 because of that very important ratio that we are in the West.
Yeah, so everyone's low. That's so interesting, actually, because you just, you just don't know these things. And actually, it's really interesting what you're saying as well, because it's so individual. Like, the answer isn't, and you kind of want the simplistic answer, or I certainly want the simplistic answer that plant-based is best, but it's not a simplistic answer like that at all, is it? It's what's best for each individual person based on not even, like what you're saying, it's like, it's your genetics, it's what you're actually experiencing in life right now, it's what else, like, it's so many things. And it's just, I think, nutrition isn't simple at all, but I think we have a tendency to sort of oversimplify it in a way, and I'm kind of all for making it simple and making it much easier to understand, but you're kind of blowing my mind with how complicated it actually is.
It is, but actually, so I can throw enzymes at you in epigenetics and talk about gene expression till the cows come home and whether or not you're converting. And that's fine, because that's my job to do. But actually, the intervention is very, very simple. The intervention is we should all be supplementing omega-3. And it's regardless of where we fall on the plants. And also, a vegan diet is incredibly healthy. It's just not right for everybody all of the time, especially in different life phases. It just changes.
But equally, nor is a carnivorous diet right for everyone all the time. I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? It's finding what's right for you.
Yeah, and there's this real buzzword going around, and it was going around maybe about 5 years ago, and I kind of scoffed at it and went, oh, for goodness sake, that's just influencers saying that. But I actually think there's something in it. And it's the term intuitive eating. And I don't mean it the way that influencers mean it, of like, ooh, today I intuitively wanted a banana, so that's all I ate all day. That's not like what we're talking about. But just tuning into your body and going, do you know what? I don't need any more meat right now. What I really need is some more vegetables. Or what I need is a tiny amount of supplementation because I don't feel I'm meeting that need, you know? Yeah. And it's absolutely possible to have a healthy vegan diet. It just has to be done with care, especially when it comes to the inflammatory omega-6, which can be quite high in a vegan diet because it's higher in nuts, seeds, and omega-6 containing fats.
Because what I kind of found when I first went plant-based was that I just kind of felt a sense of, not relief, but I felt like I should feel, if that makes sense. Like I felt like I was carrying a bit of weight. No, I don't mean physical weight. I don't mean like I was feeling fat. I mean that I just sort of always felt a bit sluggish and always felt a bit like, I describe it as I felt like I had a sack of tatties on my shoulders all the time because I just sort of felt a bit blah. And so for me, going plant-based was an instant kind of like, yes, that's the way that I want to eat, because I instantly felt so much better. But what was also really interesting was I didn't really realize that I didn't feel good. So it was really interesting because it allowed me to, almost what you're saying is eat intuitively, in that it allowed me to feel much better, so I knew what feeling worse was, if you know what I mean. So now when I overindulge in something, I'm like, oh yeah, that's because I ate so much of whatever. Whereas previously, I kind of poo-pooed it and was like, yeah, my body can take anything, I'll stuff anything in, it'll be fine. And actually, it's really not the case, is it?
No, it's not the case at all. And it's unpeeling all those onion layers, as it were, till you get to the absolute root cause and you see, right, okay, like I just needed some more vegetables. That's all that needed to happen here. And absolutely, because you were flooding your body with plant components and antioxidants and polyphenols, you would have felt a million times better. I mean, I know that because I felt it too. And yeah, it really allows you to see. And the thing with omega-3 and omega-6 is you can't really notice the difference until it's too late. It's a sneaky one. It's a bit like, yeah, it is sneaky. It's a bit like vitamin D. So you don't know that there's a problem until years down the line with omega, until it's a bit too late. And so I would love to just kind of get that message out there to people who are on a plant-based diet to try, where possible, to supplement their omegas before an inflammatory condition occurs. And then we have to have the conversation about whether or not some animal products would be good to address that. I don't want it to ever get to that stage for people. If they're choosing to be on a vegan diet, then that should be healthy and sustainable as it is, just with a tiny bit of supplementation.
That's really interesting, actually, because I always think that your body will tell you if something's not right, and I sort of feel like I'll soon know if I'm lacking anything in my diet. But that's a very good point, that actually I maybe won't soon know. I'll know, but it might be a bit too late by the time I find out.
It's usually too late. Some things you can correct very quickly, but other things it's 20 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. It's a bit too late. I know that because I was in that position. It's too late. And I also know that because a lot of my clients turn up on my door when it is, and this is not vegans that turn up on my door, this is everybody turns up on my door when it is far too late.
I suppose that's a problem. That's when people reach out to a nutritionist, isn't it? When things are actually at a point where you can't correct, you don't know how to correct yourself, you're kind of calling for help.
You're screaming from help from the rooftops, and I think it would be so wonderful if we could change the dialogue from, oh, I've got this terrible, terrible, terrible chronic health condition, to no, could we just impart some preventative nutrition now before it's too late. And if I can kind of say anything that will get people on that path.
Because you don't check up on your health. You don't check up on your dietary health the same way as you do check up on the rest of your health, do you? You don't go, like you go to the dentist for a checkup, you know, you go to the optician for a checkup. You don't go to the nutritionist for a checkup.
It's mad. I've never thought about it like that, Norma. You're absolutely right. You go to the dentist, but you don't check your nutrient levels. I mean, I do, but that's because I'm a massive geek. But you can check your delta. So the thing is you can test all the things we're talking about. You can test your omega-3 to 6 ratio. You can test your omega levels. You can test all of your nutrients within your body with functional tests. I won't mention any brands.
I'm going to ask you how we do that, but just 1 second whilst I drain my tatties and show the next step. So once your tatties are boiled, you'll know they're cooked when, you know, I'm sure everyone knows how to know when their tatties are cooked, but your fork will just slide through it and slide off. So it's not sort of holding any hardness in the center anymore. And then we're just going to drain it. Excuse my kind of rookie sink here because I'm in cook along corner. But we're just going to drain it here.
I love your pots, Norma. They are
thanks. Very, very They're actually quite new. They've got white inside, so they can show what I'm cooking very well. So I just love it.
Brilliant.
Okay, so now we've drained our tatties. I'm just going to pop them back in the pan, and we're going to add we're going to give them a quick mash, just a very quick mash, before we add our frozen peas. And it doesn't matter that your peas are frozen because they're going to cook basically in the heat of the tatties. They don't take long to cook at all. So the heat of the tatties will just cook them really quite quickly. So we're just going to mash the tatties and the peas. And you don't need to completely mash the peas, to be honest, but you just want to kind of break them down so they're not going to be rolling out of your fish cakes. So just give that a bit of a mash. And then into that, we're going to add this lovely bowl of goodness that we prepared earlier, which is 2 tablespoons of capers, finely chopped, 10 grams of dill, 10 grams of chives, 1 red chilli, finely diced, 2 tablespoons of seaweed, the zest of a lemon, and the juice of a lemon. So we're just going to add all that incredible taste into here. And then, oh, it smells amazing. The combination,
honestly,
of
hungry.
Combination of capers and seaweed is just, and lemon juice is just, I just think it's like such a realistic taste of the sea. Without seafood, it does just taste, I think even a fish lover would love these fish cakes. So we're just going to mash that all together, try and get it really quite nicely combined. Give it a taste, and if you want to add any more salt or pepper, be my guest. You probably wouldn't need to add any more salt though, because the seaweed does have quite a kind of salty flavour to it anyway. Sorry, that's quite a nasty sound, so I'm just going to get in there with a spoon to combine it rest. See, it's all kind of sticking together really quite nicely. Just going to give it a quick taste. I'm not going to add any salt, but I'm just going to add a pinch of black pepper there. Mix that through. And then we're just going to turn them into patties, which is going to be really quite nice and relaxing. But what I'm going to do, just before I do that, is put some chickpea flour on the board so we can coat them in that flour, which will mean they brown off quite nicely. And the reason I'm using chickpea flour, I tend to use chickpea flour in most things rather than plain flour, just because it's got that little extra bit of protein in it. And personally, I just kind of like it more. I don't cook with an awful lot of wheaty flour. I tend to use chickpea flour or buckwheat flour, and it's just become a bit of a habit, which works quite nicely. Right, rings off, and we're going to make these into a patty. And what I was going to ask Cara was, how do we find out? How do we check our levels?
Right. So there's some very good companies out there. I could tell you some names if you'd like.
That'd be wonderful. Like, can you do it? Is it a thing that you can sort of, do you have to go in person to get them done, or can you send off samples and things?
You can send off samples. I would always recommend that you see a nutritional therapist to do this. Right. The reason being is that if you get those test results back and you can't interpret them,
which is very likely.
It's a bit pointless. So anyone could order the test, but not everybody can interpret them. So I would say do it under the care of a nutritionist so that we can interpret it for you. But there are some very good companies out there. So the one that kind of is available for everyone is MediChex. You can do a very simple omega-3 to omega-6 check there. I think it's about £130 at the moment. You can check it through Genova Diagnostics. Again, you need a practitioner to order that for you. You can also check it through Regeneris Laboratories as well. And most of the omega tests will come in around about 130 to 150 to check it. And then I'm so distracted. Those look amazing. They just look fantastic. And then if you wanted to check your nutrient levels, which I think is particularly helpful for vegans, I would recommend the Nutrition Check by MediChex. It's a finger prick blood test that you just do at home and send away, and you get it a week later. You wouldn't even need a nutritionist to interpret that test at all. Okay. It's very self-explanatory, and that looks at your B12 and zinc and magnesium and your ferritin and folate. And it also looks at your triglycerides, which is quite important. And then if you wanted to go a bit further and look at your complement B vitamins, your B2, your B3, B5 and B6, B12, vitamin A, vitamin E, all the rest of it, then you could do something called a metabolomics plus, which is a brilliant functional test via Regeneris Laboratories, and it's the best one out there. It also looks at your vitamin D levels as well. And you can add an omega test to that, so you can do it all in one.
So what other things should we be looking out for? I mean, the one that kind of annoys me is the protein argument, because I think it's just nonsense, and you can absolutely get all the protein you need from a plant-based diet. But it's the smaller things, the kind of, the things that the things that probably aren't so talked about, but actually maybe we are lacking in. Is there other things in a plant-based diet that we should be conscious of and actually trying to maybe supplementing or making a much more concerted effort to eat certain things to make sure we're getting the right nutrients in a plant-based diet?
So the protein argument is ridiculous. You can absolutely get enough protein from a plant-based diet. I mean,
good. I'm so glad you said that. Otherwise, I wouldn't know what to do if you actually said, if you bust that myth, I'd be like, oh.
No. You absolutely can. You absolutely can. As long as you're eating. The issue with it, with all diets, I include all diets in this, is when people go down the free from aisle or the ready-made packaged food aisle where it's not been homemade and it's not been like. That's why I actually refer my clients quite a lot to Norma to get your meals, because you've thought about the protein in the food. I can see that, any trained eye can see that there's a lot of protein in your food. Yeah. Whereas if you go down a supermarket aisle and you get something that they have made with a bunch of rubbishy soya, that's not the same level of protein you're going to get from peas and legumes and lentils and nuts and seeds.
So two questions. One from me. I'll ask Alison's question first because she's commented, but she's saying, what about iron?
$1 million question. You can get enough iron from a plant-based diet, and you are at the same risk of being iron deficient in a plant-based diet as you are in an animal-based diet. And it is all to do with whether or not you have enough stomach acid, whether or not you are pairing that iron intake with vitamin C source. So iron absorbs better in the presence of citric acid, which is vitamin, it's just a fancy word for vitamin C. So for example, if you're relying on green leafies for a lot of your vitamin C intake, then iron intake, then you should always squeeze lemon juice over your leafy greens so that you get the vitamin C and the citric acid in there, in order to increase your iron consumption. And then it's a little bit genetic. It's whether or not you do suffer from iron uptake absorption. But what I would say is, again, test your iron, and then look at lifestyle things like, are you very stressed? Are you eating a lot of sugar? Is there a lot of pollution around? Because all of that will compete for absorption with iron. The other thing I would say is that if you're eating a diet rich in phytic acid, so things like coffee, tea, spinach, then that's going to also increase the competition at the receptor sites for iron. But that goes for vegan and non-vegan diets. You can absolutely get enough iron in a plant-based diet, 100%. Just make sure you're there with the vitamin C, and that you have enough stomach acid, so that you're really mindfully eating your food and checking in with your food before consuming it, getting that gastric acid going.
And then Alison's asking, she's saying, wow, that's super interesting. What about the myth about not drinking tea with sources of iron? Is that true? That's a myth that I've told her, so...
It's true. So that is a myth. That is a myth. Hang on. Tea with a...
So consuming caffeine after you've eaten iron, does that stop the absorption of the iron?
Yes, it does. Okay. It does. Yeah, it does. You have to have tea and iron 2 hours away from each other because of the phytic acid and the tannins in it. They compete at the absorption sites for iron. So where possible, take it away. We're all guilty of that. We are
totally.
All 100%.
It's really it's just a habit, isn't it? You like wash your food down with tea.
Every morning I take my multivitamin that has my source of iron in it with a cup of tea.
And you're a nutritionist, yeah.
So, we're all guilty of it. But yes, in an ideal world, which we're not living in, it would be ideal if you separate the caffeine from the iron. So you asked what things are lacking.
Just before you go on to that, I'm just going to show what the next step I did on the fish cakes was. So you saw me kind of make them into patés, and then what I did was just covered them in chickpea flour, and that sort of helps brown them off. And then I've just put them a couple tablespoons of olive oil in a non-stick frying pan, pop the fish cakes in there, and then on a medium-low heat, we're just going to let them cook through. You don't want to put them on too high, or they'll burn before they're sort of cooked through. So medium-low heat, and then we'll flip them in sort of about 3 minutes. Cameraman, could you pass me a flipper?
Yeah. So the things that might be lacking that are worth checking ahead of time is, and this is again goes for everybody, rooibos tea is fine, it's a herbal tea.
There we go.
So the things that are lacking, vitamin D, and that's for everybody. That is for everybody, regardless of plant-based or not.
Particularly in Scotland.
Especially in Scotland. Just a wee example, I test people for vitamin D every week, and I have yet to find a high or sufficient result for vitamin D. And that includes people who work outside all year round, not wearing sun cream. So you really want your vitamin D to be up at 100.
And is that to do with absorption, or is that just to do with getting the enough in?
That's just got to do with the complete lack of it from the sun.
Oh, God. That's a pitch to move if ever I heard one.
Yeah. It's just a complete lack from the sun. We just all need to supplement. And the way we should be supplementing is we should supplement with a sublingual spray. So not tablets, a dropper or a spray, because it's absorbed straight into the bloodstream then, and doesn't have to go through the digestive tract or the liver, which is known as the hepatic first pass. if vitamin D goes through the hepatic first pass, you lose half of the dose immediately. It gets metabolized by the liver. And so by the time it gets the bloodstream, instead of taking 2,000 IUs, you're taking 1,000. So always droppers or a spray straight into the mouth for vitamin D. And that's for everybody. And then classically on a vegan diet, we do want to be looking at B12. And it's not because you can't get it. You can. You can get it from nutritional yeast and you can get it from certain fruits and vegetables. It's absolutely true. The issue is, again, with absorption. And if you were living on an island in a perfect environment with no stress and no alcohol and no nothing, then yes, you would probably get enough vitamin B12, but we're not. We're living in a constant cortisol triggering, not enough stomach acid, polluted, toxic environment. And so even with the best possible will in the world, none of us, plant-based or not, are absorbing enough vitamin B12. So, and vitamin B12 is a sneaky one. It can really creep up on you in later years. So it is something that you want to be supplementing or checking. I mean, I would recommend that everybody do a nutrition check every single year to just as in like a blood test to check iron, vitamin D, omegas.
Okay, every year. Okay, that's quite frequent actually.
Yeah, but I mean, we're supposed to check our cholesterol every year.
And like I say, actually, you go to the dentist and the optician every year as well. So my argument actually stands true, doesn't it?
Yeah. So we really should be thinking a bit more about that. So I mean, to kind of like summarize, it should be check your omegas, but big recommendation to supplement. Check your vitamin D, big recommendation again to supplement, because 9 times out of 10 it'll be low. Do check your iron before you supplement, especially in Scotland, because the Celtic gene does suffer from hemochromatosis, especially in Celtic men. So if a man is ginger or has very dark hair and is from a long line of Celtic ancestry, the chances of him having hemochromatosis are much higher than those without.
And that's the iron
gene.
Deficiency.
No, hemochromatosis is when the body stores iron and rusts from the inside. So with that, you wouldn't want to supplement with iron willy-nilly because you could be putting more in than the body could deal with. So you'd always want to check your iron levels before supplementing with it. And women, it's very practically, women lose iron every single month, whereas men don't. So the dose for men and women is completely different, and all this chat, especially on Instagram and in marketing campaigns, about everybody should be taking iron, not true. Different doses for different genders and different doses for different parts of the UK and different genetics. So always test.
God, I could actually speak to you for hours, Cara, because I've got so many questions I want to ask you, but I'm conscious we probably need to wrap up and serve these fish cakes. But it's really interesting as well about in terms of eating around your cycle and stuff like that as well. Just when you were talking about, women obviously bleed once a month and the effect that has, and actually how you probably have to eat around that and eat for that as well. It's just...
You do, yeah. And we should be having that conversation so much more often. And actually, that's the conversation I have in clinic pretty much every session with a client, because that time of the month will change everything. It will change your cravings. Yeah. It will change your capacity for nutrients. You need more nutrients at that time. So absolutely, if there's one time to take a multivitamin, it's then.
Yeah, but it's also not even as simple as that, is it? Because it's not like necessarily when you're actually having your period. Like that sort of cycle works around the month, isn't it? In terms of, yeah. Well.
Oh yeah, endless.
Right, I'm going to serve these fish cakes, because I can smell them kind of almost burning here. So I'm just going to serve them up, and there we have it. How good do these look?
They do look absolutely amazing. And I must say, I've given seaweed a bad rep on omega-3, but seaweed is one of the most it's the most nutrient dense foods, and I wish I could get people to eat more of it. It's full of tyrosine and iodine, which is amazing for the thyroid. Yeah. It has something in it. Now I want to make sure I get the antioxidant name correct, because I always mispronounce this. It's fluoxazionine, and that is an antioxidant that is incredibly good in cardiovascular disease, very, very good for balancing blood sugar levels. It stops insulin and glucose spikes in the body. And it is 13.5 times more powerful than both universal antioxidants, vitamin E and A together. And that's just in seaweed. So yes, it might not be coming up top trumps on omega-3, but it has incredible nutrient power in other ways.
So I'm not going to stop then, because I basically use this stuff, Mara seaweed. They're a fantastic company. It comes off the east coast of, it comes off the Fife Coast, I think. Fife Coast?
Yeah.
And I just use it kind of to see, I can almost use it like salt on some things, because I sort of was like, okay, this is a good source of omega-3. Turns out it's not, but I'll still keep using it.
No, it's packed full of nutrients. It's the multivitamin of the sea, and it really is incredibly good for health, like cardiovascular and blood glucose monitoring health. Fantastic. And that would be a whole nother live talking about managing your blood glucose levels. So anything you can do there is fantastic. Yeah, so it is a very powerful nutrient
I'll keep going with it then.
Keep going with it. Absolutely keep going with it. Yeah.
Right. Well, I could actually literally quiz you for hours, but I'm not going to. So here we have our 2 fish cakes, packed with good stuff, like I say, potatoes, peas, chilies, all sorts of flavors in there, and it's delicious served with either just a fresh side salad or with some more peas, and edamame beans are actually really beautiful to get some more protein in there as well, or some fresh asparagus, which is in season and lovely as well. So yeah, the recipe is on Instagram. The full recipe is on Instagram. The ingredients are on Facebook, but you can also watch back this live anytime to watch me cook along, or if you missed any of Cara's amazing insight there, because there was a lot to take on board, so you can watch it back at any time and then dig into the details of that. So Cara, thanks very much for joining. Where can people find you or work with you or anything? Is there anything you want to share in terms of how they can get in touch?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. I'm at Cara Redpath Nutrition. And you can find my website, which is www.cararedpathnutrition.com. And yeah, you can DM me there. You can ask me any questions. You can follow along with my West Coast adventure of living on the West Coast and trying to eat healthy.
I have to say, actually, Cara,
always be easy.
I watch your stories on Instagram a lot, and I find your voice so soothing. Actually, I really kind of enjoy your Instagram stories. I find them just very tranquil and soothing.
Good. No, I mean, the locals are like, oh God, there goes Cara again, you're talking to her phone. But yeah, I think I just like sharing my life on there, and yeah.
No, keep it going.
I'd love to see you all there.
Keep it going. All right, thanks very much, guys. Well, we'll love you and leave you for this week. We'll be back again next week, same time, same place, 8 o'clock, and we will have, I'm not actually entirely sure who we're going to have next week. We're going to have somebody brilliant. I'm sorting out my diary, but I'll keep you posted. But we'll be back here at 8 o'clock. So thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you all soon. All right, take care. Thanks, Cara. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.